Welcome, everyone, to the July edition of Event Talk Live. Today, we are chatting with Melinda Burdette from Meeting Professionals International about the future of hybrid events and what hybrid events are going to look like in 2021 and beyond. We're also going to be presenting to you the results from our Future of Hybrid Events survey, which we've been running over the last month and a half or so. Thank you to everyone who contributed to that survey with your thoughts and ideas about the future of hybrid events. Without further ado, I'm going to jump right into it. Melinda, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Can you please introduce yourself and give us just a brief background of your history and events?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Melinda Burdette. I am Director of Events for Meeting Professionals International, which is the largest association of meeting professionals. As far as what I've done in my event career, is I started out as one of those non-titled meeting professionals in a medical school doing medical education, and went from there to another medical association. From there, went to corporate and did some corporate event planning. Spent a little bit of time doing some stuff for the Atlanta Braves, and now I'm back doing association meetings. If you had asked me at the beginning of my career if I thought that I would ever be what my CEO calls the head chef for a bunch of chefs, I would have said absolutely not. But I'm thrilled to be able to represent the industry and represent all of our planners out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So before we jump right into these questions, I want to show our audience our results from our Future of Hybrid survey. And we're going to be chatting about these results throughout the course of this chat today. But to give everyone a little bit of background, in June and July, we surveyed over 200 event professionals to learn their thoughts on the future of hybrid events. And we're here today to present the results to you and discuss them with Melinda. So our first metric here is we wanted to ask event professionals what their thoughts were on attending events, first and foremost, because if event professionals aren't comfortable, our attendees will not be. So that was the first thing we asked, was how likely are you to attend an in-person event this year? And we saw that over 50% rated themselves as likely to attend. So Melinda, what kind of events do you think attendees are prioritizing right now when it comes to offline events specifically?
Yeah, those in-person events need to be safe. Everyone still has a level of fear associated with going back to a face-to-face situation. And even though, we're certainly seeing cities open up, like we just had our program in Vegas, where Vegas was 100% open, we still had a duty of care to go through to make sure that our attendees were safe. So I think that if you have the time, if you have the budget, and if it's a conference that you want to go to, the fourth thing that you're looking at is how safe am I going to be going to that conference and then coming back to that conference for my family. We saw a lot of that happening. We saw people who just didn't have budgets to attend, whether their companies were banning travel, still banning travel, those kinds of things. And certainly it's a moving target, right? And with the cases of this new variant increasing, it's just going to still continue to be a moving target until we can get it under control.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So safety is number one when it comes to attracting attendees. I want to go into the next couple of questions, actually, because they kind of go together. So I went a step further with the attendance question and asked our event professionals what they would rather do when it comes to hybrid events. Would they rather attend online or in person? And the majority of them said that it depends. So of course, it depends on what? That was our next question. What factors are you going to consider when deciding whether or not to attend a hybrid event virtually versus online? And so those factors that they cited as the biggest ones are obviously travel cost, ticket cost, as some of the most important variables. So how do you think that event managers should or will adjust their prices moving forward to accommodate that mix of virtual and hybrid attendees?
Yeah, we've all been kind of struggling at what the correct price point is to have if you are doing a fully hybrid event, and we'll talk about what the definition of that is later on. But You just have to adjust with what the market will bear. There's so much free education out there right now that, you have to figure out what is it that you're delivering? What are your costs associated with that? How can you find some synergies associated with the cost, and make sure that you're doing your break even point so that you know at what point you're starting to make money, so that you're certainly not going in with a losing proposition. I mean, we all have, and we're all subject to these fire sales, right? That happen as you get closer to an event and you're not seeing your attendance numbers be what they are. But just look at the trends associated with that. We have found that people don't register for a webinar or an online event until about 14 days out is when you'll start seeing the push for that. So just know that that's coming, and trust the data that's out there. There is an extreme amount of data associated with when people make the decision to attend an event, whether they're doing it in person or virtually. So just pay attention to the data, have that plan in place, have a backup plan in place. If you need to do some fire sales to get some folks there to make sure that you're covering your costs and making the appropriate amount of profit back to your organization.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. And now, speaking about price, this is the perfect segue into now talking about budget. So I've got two charts that I'm going to show here side by side because I think that these are both really interesting. We asked organizers what percentage of attendees they think will show up to their events live versus virtually, and also what percentage of their budgets they plan to dedicate to live versus virtual components. And there was a little bit of a mismatch here. So as you can see, organizers indicated that they expect a larger percentage of attendees to join their hybrid events virtually, but they still plan to allocate the majority of their budget to offline event production. How do you think event organizers should approach their budgets when planning hybrid events? And do you think that this imbalance is by design, or do you think that it will self-correct down the line?
Well, I think it's by design. So when you're going into a truly hybrid event, which means that you've got a live event that you're also bringing to a digital audience, whether you do that live or whether you do that in pre-recordings or however it is that you're trying to connect those audiences, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but you have to figure out what that percentage is. Now, it's interesting to note that the 200 attendees who responded to the poll felt like a large majority would still be digitally. We did not see that in June. We saw actually the reverse of that. So when we had our program last November in the middle of the pandemic, before you had vaccines going out, we had over 1,100 people, almost 1,200 people digitally, and a little over 600 people in person. That completely flip-flopped for Vegas, where we had, almost 2,000 in total, but the in-person was the 1,200 number, and the digital was the 600 number. So for me, it's more about how are you creating your event? When we knew we were in the middle of the pandemic, we created the event, and especially like our general session rooms and things like that, for the digital audience. So it was like playing to a TV show like Saturday Night Live or something like that. So our sets looked a little bit different. But when we knew we had 1,200 people coming in person, we planned the event for the in-person audience, for that offline audience. And so the online audience saw a little bit different perspective. So again, it's how are you planning that meeting going forward? Who are you playing to? What audience are you playing to? Because it's very difficult to play appropriately to both audiences. And I don't know that anyone has really perfected that as of yet. We do the best that we can, but you have to figure out what audience are you going to play to at that point. And of course, from a budget standpoint, depending upon the level of engagement that you're doing in your event, are you live streaming all your concurrent education, or are you just content capturing those? What the budget is for that. And always remember that if you are content capturing your events, you have the opportunity to then archive those and offer those on demand. So you've really got revenue that can come in after the event is over with, depending upon the way that you package that up. So always keep that in mind as well, is that, that digital aspect of any sort of hybrid event doesn't end when the revenue, when the end of the event is. That can carry on as long as that education lives.
Yeah, that's been a big theme that we've talked about at a lot of our Event Talk Live events over the last couple of months, is how that content that we are creating at events can now live on after the event and continue to generate revenue streams. So really good to hear that that is a theme that will continue with hybrid events. I want to take a quick second here just to remind our audience that if you have any questions for Melinda, we will have 10 minutes at the end for audience Q&A. So just submit your questions on the right-hand side. There's a Q&A tab at the top of the chat box. Just click that little Q&A tab, type out your question, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the discussion. All right, so our next little metric that I want to highlight here from our survey, now it goes more into the planning and the actual event design of hybrid events. So this question asks organizers, what elements would you include in a hybrid experience? And obviously the most popular one was that simultaneous live streaming of in-person sessions, that content capture and then delivering it live. And then some of the other most common elements are interactive conversations between attendees at home and in person. So I'm really curious, Melinda, how do you think event organizers can and should facilitate interaction between their attendees who are tuning in from at home with their attendees who are actually at the event live and in person?
Yeah, that's a struggle, right? How do you engage them? Because as an event organizer, you really want those digital participants to have that fear of missing out, right? You're creating that FOMO for them. And really the in-person audience, what we found that the in-person audience in Vegas a few weeks ago didn't really care anything about interacting with that digital audience. They were too busy interacting with each other. There face to face. And so, while the digital audience definitely wanted to interact with the live audience, it didn't really go both ways. So, how do you create that opportunity? And I think I don't know that anyone has perfected that at this point. You can certainly have, live Q&As and live chats, but you got to have staff. We'll talk about that a little bit from a budget perspective and what to expect, but I'm not sure that anyone has perfected that yet. We at MPI certainly haven't yet. It's certainly a piece that we need to figure out eventually. I think we're getting better at it by having fan cams and, the ways to bring the digital audience into the live experience. But it is definitely a struggle.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. I think kind of along those same lines, I'm curious about how your sponsors interacted with, and I apologize, this is a little bit out of nowhere. I just thought of it right now, but I'm wondering how your sponsors were able to pull off that interaction with both the digital and in-person audience. Did you see them kind of split into teams? Some people were doing digital, some offline. How did that work?
Yeah, so we did have a digital trade show in addition to a live trade show, and some companies were represented on both platforms, both live and digitally, and it was a struggle for them, trying to get them to understand that it really was, you needed two separate people. You needed somebody physically in your area, and then you needed somebody physically online, and so it was a little bit of a struggle for those, and that could have been. We could have possibly done a better job at communication or setting expectations and those kinds of things. The folks who did it just digitally loved it. We offered them opportunities to do product demos within their booths. So it was we really created an experience for the sponsors that was just like it would be if you were there. For them. But I think our folks that struggled the most were the ones who had a presence in both areas and just didn't possibly staff it appropriately.
Okay, got it. That makes a lot of sense then. Thank you. I appreciate that. And just another reminder for our audience, I see we have a couple of questions submitted, but if you have any questions for Melinda, please submit them into the Q&A section on the right-hand side, and we will have about 10 minutes at the end of the session to get to all of those questions. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. We've got another stat to show you from our survey. So after we asked about which elements you'd include in a hybrid experience, we also wanted to ask what tech features in an event platform are most important for a hybrid experience. And so we gave a lot of different options. And by far, the most important tech features, besides live streaming capabilities, are the ability for at-home and with one another, and the ability for at-home and in-person attendees to participate in audience Q&As live at the same time. Do you think this type of integration is possible, not only on a technological level, but also on an organizational level?
Yeah, you got to have staffing associated with it, right? So if you have to have someone that is monitoring that digital Q&A and that digital chat, so that and somehow have a queue to make sure that your MC or whoever it is that is taking those questions has that opportunity to be able to ask. So if you've got a long line, think about standing microphones, right, for Q&A. So if you've got a long line in person, you've got a long line digitally as well. So you have to have a plan associated with how you're going to mix that, and you're going to have staff that staffs that's sitting in front of the Q&A opportunity for that digital audience to make sure that that is being communicated to the speaker from a Q&A standpoint. So again, it's about budget. It's about staffing. If you can get volunteers to help you out in that situation, that would be great as well. People that know tech and aren't confused about what's going on. But yeah, it's interesting that, in choosing a platform, you really have to be able to identify what are the must-haves and what are the nice-to-haves, right? And make sure that when you're evaluating each of the platforms, if you go out to RFP or whatever, does the things and has the capability that you must have in order to have your successful event. And that's different for everybody. Mm-hmm. So you just have to identify what that is, make sure that platform does do that, and then choose it accordingly. You can't always go with the cheapest price or the one that's the most expensive because you think it's got more bells and whistles. But if it's got bells and whistles that you're not going to use, then you don't need to go that route. So it's very, very important to get that must-have versus nice-to-have opportunity.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move into our last kind of section of the survey, and this has to do with attendee metrics. So we asked our survey respondents what the most important attendee metrics are to them in order to kind of determine the success of their events month over month or year over year, whatever the case may be. And they said that the most important attendee metric to determine is the number of attendees. By far, it was the number of attendees. Do you think this shows that organizers will focus more on hybrid events moving forward in order to maximize that attendance and get the most out of their event so they can attack both the offline and the online audience?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a consideration. But if your audience is not amenable to doing things online, then why create something that's not going to have the return for you? So again, it goes back to saying, what is the purpose of having this meeting, and does it need to be, you need to be having that conversation in the beginning is what do you want, what is the behavior coming out of this meeting, and can we or should we achieve that by both doing hybrid event or a live event or a virtual event? You have to make that determination, and then once you go down that path, you've got to make sure and accommodate, especially if it's hybrid, both sides of the aisle, both sides of those attendees. So I think it really just depends on on knowing your audience. What are they going to want to do? Can they travel? All of those things that we're already thinking about at this point. And then what is it that you're trying to get out of your meeting? Is it a number of attendees? Is it more of like a professional development type of thing? Is it more like a rah-rah kickoff sales meeting kind of thing? I mean, what is it? What's the purpose of the meeting? And that really will help you in determining which path you need to go down.
That makes perfect sense. Know your audience, first and foremost. All right, last statistic I want to hear before we jump into our audience Q&A. I asked organizers what attendee metrics are most important to your event sponsors and exhibitors when determining the success of your event. And again, this one was pretty standout. By far, it was quality of leads and lead scoring. So I'm curious, how do you think that lead scoring and lead collection will be different for offline and online event attendees for hybrid events moving forward?
Yeah, we all know that sponsor and exhibitor ROI is about the lead. It always has been. It always will be. That will never change. However, how you're going to do that is based on the platforms that you're doing. You're still, if it's an in-person opportunity, you're still scanning badges, right? Or somehow having some sort of kiosk versus a business card exchange. I think that there's still some angst against that business card exchange. So having that electronically be able to have between the attendee and the exhibitor in an in-person environment is great. Same thing for your digital environment as well. Is you want to make sure that when you're setting your sponsors up for success or assisting them set up for success, that you're helping them decide. You have to have an engaging booth, right? You have to have something, if it's a giveaway that's going to get them there or a demo that's going to get them there, you have to entice them. It's a little bit harder to entice digitally for someone to step into your booth and have that conversation. So what is it that you're going to do to entice the people to get there? And then what's the lead generation out of that? So there's a lot of talk about setting sponsors up as thought leaders in a certain area and those kinds of things to kind of drive that help drive attendance and those leads.
Got it. Thank you. That is a really good, really detailed answer. So thank you very much. And that concludes all of the questions that I had for you, as well as the results of our survey, which I will be sending out this slide deck tomorrow with our follow-up emails. So you will be able to see all of the survey results again. If you missed them, I know I went through them really quickly. And the recording for this session will also be available as soon as the event ends. All right, so let's jump into our audience Q&A. We've got about 8 minutes left. And Marilyn was wondering, does live streaming an event make it more interesting or less interesting to the virtual audience? I think they mean in comparison to, say, putting on a fully virtual event.
Yeah, it depends. We had Usher that came at WEC Las Vegas. So I'm sure that was exciting for both the live and the digital audience to be able to have a conversation with them. Again, it's what your content is. We don't ever expect anyone to sit on a digital opportunity for 8 hours a day. So figure out what your schedule is going to be and engage that digital audience. And then if you're doing a fully hybrid event, you have to figure out where those synergies are between that in-person event and the digital audience, and try to make that as compelling as possible for those touch points.
Got it. Judy is wondering, have you ever used an on-site virtual attendee liaison for your event? I have read quite a bit about it, but I'm wondering if anyone has tips on how to make the most impact of the virtual experience.
Yeah, so we actually have a virtual concierge. We did this last year through a partner of ours called Cloud Touch, who had some digital signage, and they really just look like big iPhones, right? But they have microphone and camera capabilities. So we had one of our staff. We started it back in Grapevine when we were there. We just had one of our staff be either at the office or at their home, and they were really served as our info desk, right? Ask them a question. Ask them where something was in the convention center. We provided them with copious notes associated with the layout of the space. We did the same thing in Vegas and had that virtual concierge. We did not connect it to the digital audience. We still have to figure out what that looks like in the long run. But yeah, the in-person virtual concierge is a huge hit.
Got it. Oh, that's awesome. That's a really cool idea. Spencer's wondering, when do you feel is the best point to assess tailoring to either virtual or in person? Do initial registration numbers factor in, you rely on one format or the other, or would you decide that ahead of opening registrations?
Yeah,
actually, I had that question too.
Yeah, you're going to decide that ahead of opening registration, right? If again, it's knowing your audience. If you can always add, don't get me wrong, you can always add a hybrid, a virtual event to your live event. So if you're already going down a live event, just make sure you've got some budget set aside if you wanted to add on that hybrid part of it. Obviously, you're going to get some opportunity for sponsorship revenue to come in and registration revenue to come in to offset those costs if you didn't budget for it. But you just have to figure out then what are you going to do in the beginning. So, you know, our near future is that we're already planning hybrid from the get-go. So you're already thinking about that when you're sourcing speakers or setting up timeframes and all of those kinds of things, which does make it easier in the long run. But trust me, you know, I mean, we planned Grapevine within something like that when we knew we couldn't go fully live or fully digital. We didn't want to go fully digital. We wanted to be able to show you could meet live and meet safely. So you can always make those decisions. It's going to be harder to make a decision to go live and in person because, you know, now what we've got is a compression of venues. So everybody wants to go back to having meetings. So your availability of a venue, if you decide to add live to a digital event, is going to be a little bit harder.
Got it. Totally understand. All right. Brenda submitted a question. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to try and truncate it. They're basically trying to decide between a small venue versus a large venue, and they're not sure which venue to go with because they don't know, they're not sure what their audience is going to be looking like. They say if they book the smaller venue, they might sell out early and have to turn folks away. But if they book the larger venue, obviously they might end up paying more than they would like to for a smaller number of people. So what kind of, how would you go about making that decision? Do you have any advice?
That's almost the perfect scenario to put a hybrid event in, right? Mm-hmm. Because you could go with a smaller event and create a marketing theme around it's limited to the first 500 people or however many people you can put in that venue, and then make sure that you add on a digital portion of that and make it a truly hybrid event. That almost seems like the perfect scenario for you. You know, I can't tell you which one to choose. Unfortunately, you've got to figure that out from knowing your audience and what you want to get out of your meeting. So I wish you the best of luck with it. But to me, it sounds like almost the perfect opportunity to institute a hybrid option.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I know we have a bunch of questions still coming in, but we've got about 2 minutes left. So I'm just going to give you one more question from our audience. Alan is wondering, he said that Freeman has been promoting the notion of an integrated event model mix where a brand has a few pillar in-person events with many virtual events year round. How do you think ROI will play into determining what that mix will look like in the future?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting opportunity. It's one thing that we're looking at doing, you know, having some pre-education before WEC, having post-education, and something that lives throughout the year. It's certainly a model worth thinking about and worth working with. You know, I don't know how I really hadn't studied up on it enough to know how you would segment that out. But it's certainly an intriguing opportunity, right? And we partner with Freeman, so it's certainly something we've had conversations about extending the lifeline of our signature events. We just hadn't quite figured that out yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, Melinda, thank you again so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. I know I've learned a ton from you. I hope everyone else has learned a ton. For the rest of our audience, stick around because we're not done yet. We've got 2 more sessions left today. Up next at 2:30 Eastern time, we will be entertained by Big Head Cartoon Caricatures in one of the breakout sessions. So just head back to the lobby and look at the agenda. You'll see that there. At the same time, we'll also have networking opportunities available. You can click on the networking button on the left-hand side of your screen to join either the sales or CX networking workshops. So you could chat with our team, ask them any questions you might have about the platform, or you could just chat with your fellow attendees. We also have our lounge open where you can go for casual, unstructured conversation. And then, of course, you can continue to use the chat function on the right-hand side of the page. And then we'll see you right back here at 3 o'clock Eastern time for our Event Talk with the Experts panel discussion. Thanks again, Melinda, and everyone else have a great rest of your afternoon.
Bye, guys.